Imagine a land where the sky turns black with dust, where crops wither, and where thousands of families are forced to abandon their homes. This was the reality of the Dust Bowl, the worst agricultural disaster in American history. What caused this devastation, and how did it change the United States forever? Join us as we uncover the story of the Dust Bowl, a tragic chapter in history that reshaped the nation. Initial context. Initially, the Great Plains region in North America, where the Dust Bowl event would later occur, was not considered suitable for European-style agriculture. This area was known as a desert, with limited water, little wood, harsh cold winters and scorching summers, along with very low rainfall, making it less attractive for cultivation and farming compared to neighboring regions. However, a series of factors later turned the Great Plains into a desirable destination for farmers, leading to unprecedented intensive cultivation. These factors included land grant laws providing subsidies to farmers, an unusually wet period that created favorable conditions for agriculture, the development of the grain market during World War I, and the mechanization of agriculture that significantly increased productivity. The Homestead Act of 1862, a land grant law for settlers in the United States, encouraged entrepreneurship and population growth in this region. The end of the American Civil War in 1865 and the completion of the first transcontinental railroad 4 years later strongly stimulated waves of migration to the Great Plains. The U.S. government recognized the challenges of farming on arid land in border areas and made changes in agricultural land allocation. Specifically, the Kincaid Act was enacted in 1904, providing 641 acres, about 260 hectares, of land for settlers in 37 counties in northwest Nebraska. Subsequently, the enlarged Homestead Act of 1909 granted 320 acres, equivalent to about 129 hectares, of land to settlers in other areas of the Great Plains, especially in dry farming regions. From the early 20th century, this region witnessed waves of immigration from Europe, and an unusually wet period in the 1920s and 1930s in the Great Plains solidified the belief that semi-arid areas could become suitable for large-scale agriculture. The development of technology and mechanization, with the emergence of tractors and combine harvesters, also greatly supported this process. A typical example is the eastern part of the Llano Estacado, high plains in eastern New Mexico and northwest Texas, where the agricultural land area doubled from 1900 to 1920 and tripled from 1925 to 1930. Natural fate. Many settlers believed in the notion that rain follows the plow, meaning that settlement and cultivation would permanently change the weather in the Great Plains. Turning it into fertile land, settlers, land speculators, politicians, and even some scientists believed that building houses and farming would permanently affect the climate of the semi-arid Great Plains, making it a suitable place for agriculture. This belief led to excessive and unsustainable cultivation, contributing to the formation of the Dust Bowl. This misconception was related to the manifest destiny, a belief that the United States had a sacred duty to expand westward. The price of wheat increased in the 1910s and 1920s, along with the demand from Europe during World War I, leading farmers to plow millions of acres of land to grow wheat, corn, and other crops. However, when the United States fell into the Great Depression, the price of wheat plummeted, and in desperation, farmers even plowed up more grasslands in an attempt to harvest more wheat to break even. When the drought began in 1934, the situation worsened. The overplowed land had no more native grasses and plants to hold the soil, and the soil began to be blown away by the wind, creating large dust storms that caused severe economic damage, especially in the southern plains. The Black Blizzard attacks American land. The Dust Bowl event officially began in 1930 and lasted for about 10 years. This event not only caused drought damage, but also had long-term effects on the region's economy. In 1930, a severe drought occurred in the Midwest and the southern Great Plains. From 1931, large dust storms began to appear, and a series of consecutive years of drought made the situation worse. By 1934, about 35 million acres of previously cultivated land had become unproductive, and an additional 125 million acres, equivalent to about 3/4 of the area of Texas, were gradually losing topsoil. Fortunately, at the end of 1939, the rain began to return, marking the end of the Dust Bowl. However, its economic consequences still remained, with a declining population in the hardest-hit areas where the value of agricultural land could not be restored, and this situation continued until the 1950s. During the Dust Bowl period, massive dust storms, also known as black blizzards, ravaged the Great Plains. Some storms even carried dust from Texas and Oklahoma to faraway places like Washington, D.C. and New York, and they even affected ships in the Atlantic Ocean. The large dust clouds made the sky dark for days at a time. In many places, the dust was so thick that people had to use shovels to clear it from their yards and homes, even from tightly sealed houses. The dust dirtied food, utensils, and belongings. Many people suffered from dust pneumonia, causing chest pain and difficulty breathing. It is not known exactly how many people died from this condition, estimated to range from hundreds to thousands of people. The horror of the dust storms during the Dust Bowl event reached unprecedented levels in U.S. history. The number of storms increased significantly from 1932 to 1941, peaking with dozens of storms each year from 1936 to 1938. In 1935, 100 million acres of land were heavily affected by dust storms. Houses were buried under layers of dust, machinery was damaged, and all windows and doors had to be tightly sealed. Among the storms, some only created small sand drifts in fences and ditches, but there were enormous black storms, reaching heights of 7,000 to 8,000 feet, accompanied by thunder and lightning. On November 11, 1933, a strong storm in southern Colorado swept away the topsoil. On May 9, 1934, one of the largest storms lasting 2 days swept away a large amount of topsoil from the Great Plains. The dust from this storm reached Chicago, depositing 5,000 tons of sandy soil there, and then continued to move to coastal cities in the east, such as Buffalo, Boston, Cleveland, New York, and Washington, D.C. During the winter of 1934 to 1935, the dust settled densely over New England. In Amarillo, Texas, 1935, was the worst year with 908 hours of dust storms. During that time, visibility dropped to 0 for 11 consecutive hours. Another storm lasted for 3 hours. On April 14, 1935, known as Black Sunday, witnessed 20 black storms sweeping across the entire Great Plains region from Canada to Texas, making the day as dark as night. Reporter Robert E. Geiger reported on this event from Boise City, Oklahoma, and his article used the term Dust Bowl. But editor Edward Stanley in Kansas City provided a specific view of the dust storms he witnessed. The New Deal program. President Franklin Roosevelt took steps to help poor farmers and those displaced by the Dust Bowl. He recognized that overcultivation was the main cause of the Dust Bowl disaster, and immediate action was needed. As part of his New Deal program, the U.S. Congress established the Soil Erosion Service and the Prairie States Forestry Project in 1935. The purpose of these programs was to reduce soil erosion and improve the environment in the Great Plains. They required farmers to plant windbreaks on farms to prevent wind erosion and introduce new sustainable farming methods. The Soil Erosion Service, now known as the Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS, developed new farming techniques to help reduce soil erosion and prevent similar conditions to the Dust Bowl in the future. The OKIE. In the 1930s, about 2.5 million people left the heavily affected states of the Dust Bowl, including Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, Nebraska, Kansas, and Oklahoma. This was one of the largest migrations in U.S. history. Oklahoma, one of the hardest hit states, lost about 440,000 people due to migration. Most of these people, who were mostly poor, headed west in search of new jobs. From 1935 to 1940, about 250,000 people from Oklahoma moved to California, with many settling in the San Joaquin Valley, a prosperous agricultural area. The refugees from the Dust Bowl were often referred to as OKIEs. When they arrived in California, they faced discrimination. The OKIEs had to work hard for low wages and live in poor conditions such as shanty towns or makeshift camps along irrigation ditches. The term OKIE became a derogatory term for any migrant from the Dust Bowl, regardless of where they came from. Dust Bowl and art and culture. The Dust Bowl was not only an environmental disaster, but also became a source of inspiration for many artists, musicians, and writers. They used their art to depict the pain and life of the survivors of the Dust Bowl. John Steinbeck, a famous writer, described the hardships of the OKIEs in his novel, The Grapes of Wrath, published in 1939. Photographer Dorothea Lange also captured the impoverished lives of farmers through her series of photographs for the Farm Security Administration, a government program. Artist Alexandra Hogue is also renowned for his works depicting scenes of the Dust Bowl. Woody Guthrie, a folk musician, in his album Dust Bowl Ballads, released in 1940, told stories of the economic difficulties faced by OKIEs in California. Guthrie, who hailed from Oklahoma, was also one of the migrants seeking employment during the Dust Bowl era.